Hey y'all, welcome to Chit Chat, where our interest is getting our chit together. Following the dictum, material well being follows spiritual well being. Chit means knowledge as enlightened awareness, the work required to remove the delimiters on our awareness so that said enlightenment can manifest is what we're interested in. That's the new and improved intro, y'all. I hope y'all like it. I'm Jaya. I'm here with Kishore co hosting, and this is Chit Chat, where we will also be spilling the spiritual tea. It's got a little gossipy feel to it, but we always try to keep it spiritual or keep it reality. Today, we want to be talking about censorship. The social media censorship seems to be a really hot topic of last week. And also the president being impeached twice. I don't really know what that means. And Kishore was trying to give me some enlightenment on that just before this chit chat by Googling it, the hard research of the millennials. But before we even get into all of that, Kishore's not been doing too well physically for the last 3 days. So he does look a little bit, maybe you still look cute, but you look a little bit more beat up than you normally do, like you've been through it. So
I have. I've been through it for sure. I was like literally in bed for 3 days. I ate something, I guess, not good that here, and it completely like knocked my socks off. Like I was
we
just
learned a lesson that maybe we need to be cooking all of our own food. And
wow.
Anyway, continue. Yes, continue.
Girl, I felt like a phony because I'm like Ayurveda and this and yoga lifestyle, and I cook like 80% of my food, but sometimes it's just like, you didn't have time to soak this or whatever. And I ordered from a place that I had ordered from before. It was an all vegan place. Like it's an all vegan place. Just goes to show you that you can never trust. And lo and behold, I got like this food poisoning for 3 days and it was very bad. So yeah, I might not be as sharp as I usually am, but I think I'm feeling a lot better today. I have my trusty French coconut that will be aiding me through this chit chat.
I like this idea. It goes to show you that you just can't trust. I feel like that's going to be a regular thing coming out of my mouth. It has been for the last several chit chats. Let's start off with the impeachment thing.
Yeah.
Of course, I myself have not been keeping up with the politics so much because it's just too depressing. And also because I can't navigate the truth of anything. I brought this up many times before on a personal level. I feel like it's very hard to have a meaningful discussion around the political situation because it's just really hard to discern what the actual facts are with either the plethora of information, which is too much, or just like the manipulation of even true information and then just misinformation also. So I've been keeping aloof from it, but I always have friends keeping me up to date on what's going on. The president got impeached twice. Like, what's that all about? What's going on with that?
So basically, last week we spoke about the storming of the Capitol Hill.
Right.
And I'm just laughing because Maharani Vrinda Devi is like, "Oh my God, you should cook everything yourself." I know.
Devotees judging hard. Anyway.
So last week we spoke about the storming of Capitol by various different groups and etc. and all of that. And essentially, the president has been, I guess he's still currently the president, Trump has been charged with like inciting violence through various tweets.
Now, I saw one of the tweets, and the tweet said, there were specifically two tweets, I think, that he was getting that were said to be the cause of trying to incite violence and insurrection. And one of them literally said something like, I will not be going to the inauguration.
Yeah.
Now, there doesn't seem to be anything patently violent or inciting of violence in that tweet. But I think what's been told is that it has to be taken in the general context of what's been happening. So the idea was like, I'm not going to the inauguration because some stuff is about to go down and I don't want to get caught in the crossfire. And therefore, now you have to literally read all of that into the tweet. Like the tweet actually doesn't say that. But apparently he's got banned for that.
Yeah, so like neither of the tweets, if you look at them, are like directly inciting violence, but essentially Twitter, and then Twitter was the first, and then Facebook and all of them followed suit. We're saying that, like you said, it has to be kind of taken in the context. And then essentially the way that, you know, I think just to clarify for those that are listening, like impeachment doesn't mean removal from office.
I
And I
didn't
think
know
a
that,
lot,
so that's why I was confused.
yeah, like Bill Clinton was impeached, but he wasn't removed from office. He was just
Okay.
impeached. So impeached means that like you go, that like it is now appropriate for the president to stand trial for a certain charge, right?
Mm.
So the process of impeachment is that there has to be certain like elected officials that are like voting for the impeachment to go through. So because of what happened on Capitol Hill and like the tweets that promoted, you know, violence or and insurrection, I think that was the word that was used for the impeachment, insurrection, which means kind of like breaking away from the nation.
Mm.
Then he was impeached, and now they're saying that he might stand trial as soon as the 20th, which just so happens to be inauguration day for Joe Biden, which I think is very interesting.
Well, I guess he was right. He won't be going to the inauguration. Now, I'm sure there are people who are like literally overjoyed to hear this information. And then there are other people who feel that we're entering into, and this is a term that's probably misapplied a lot, but it's something we're entering into an Orwellian dystopia. And so a lot of conversations around free speech have been coming up. They're like censoring free speech. And this is a very scary thing for people. Like, I'm not into politics or anything too much. Obviously, we have political perspectives just by participating in the culture in any way. But why is the censorship of free speech such a frightening thing for people? Like you have a little bit more experience in like worldly. Don't get me. I'm not trying to dish you or anything, but just like you're academic. You're an academic. You know, you're a very educated person, and you kind of know sort of scripts that come up for educated people in these sorts of realms. So why is the censorship of free speech such a scary thing for people?
I think it's such a scary thing. I mean, there's so many reasons, but I think the biggest reason is if you look at the history of things. You know, I think whenever people say the word communism, I'm just going to start with that. Whenever people say the word communism, like it's just like these red flags go off in people's minds, just like dun, dun, dun.
Right.
And personally, I believe that like a lot of people don't have a very, what's the word, kind of complete view of what that actually means, of like what communism actually means. And I think for good reason, because like as it has been written in a theoretical sense, like what Karl Marx actually wrote in the Communist Manifesto, like that has never existed in our history. Like what he wrote and what
did he write?
I mean,
give me a summary. Obviously, I'm not trying to get into his mind, but what did he write in a summary?
Yeah, in a summary, basically, it's the kind of like the oh my god, I can't remember like the terminology that he uses, but basically like the proletariat meaning the workers, like the workers having ownership of their work, right?
Okay.
So no longer being controlled by, you know, bureaucracy or aristocracy for that matter, and them having like full control and full domain of their work and their livelihood. Like to boil it down to a super, you know, like this.
Okay, fine.
And essentially, the problem is that that has never existed. Like we've never actually, you know, people have promised that, like in Stalinism or in Cuba or whatever. People, you know, governors and stuff, governments have promised that that's like a possibility that could happen through their revolution. But in the end, it has never happened. And what tends to happen is that the dictator at the time, whether it be Stalin or whether it be Castro, they just turn it into like this really warped version of the haves versus the have-nots. And I think, you know, the idea of communism is very interesting because it's very utopian. And here on Chit Chat, we don't really speak about utopianism so much in the material world. Right. And I think that like in general, when we go towards our spiritual understanding of life, we actually there's kind of like a general understanding that this material life is not utopian. You know, it's not a utopian place to be. And actually our perspective is that there is a higher place to be. There's a higher, you know, calling, there's a higher love, and that's where we want to go. And so I think it's really difficult sometimes, because when people have a secular understanding of the world, then it's like, how do I make this world utopian? How do I make it perfect? How do I make it work for everybody? And then you have this like very beautiful, high ideal, thing like communism. Like if you actually read it, like if you ever sit down and read the Communist Manifesto, it's just like, yeah, like you're like, I remember the first time I read it and I was just like, all of this makes sense. Like it all makes sense,
Right.
But then when you try to apply that into reality, it's just like, oh, this isn't going to work because we're living in a, material
Because
world.
people are demonic and they take advantage. And
yeah, I really like what Kristen is saying, that democracy hasn't existed as well. And I completely agree with you, Kristen.
Right.
Oh my God, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that this is where, oh yeah, this was my answer to the thing about freedom of speech. Because, when you look at the definition of democracy as well, it's like that hasn't really existed either. And I think the free speech, wait, actually, let me read what Kristen said, because I just saw that one thing. How do you decipher what is good or bad when there are so many different aspects of politics? Violence has always existed. Yes. Oh, yes, it never existed. She's talking about Marx communism. Thanks for saying. People use communism in the wrong context. And then Kristen says, according to the real definition of democracy, democracy hasn't existed as well. Karl Marx and Jesus have very similar ideologies. So I think it's really interesting, because when you look at something like freedom of speech, like, freedom of speech is one of like the main things supposedly according to democracy. And democracy is simply a government where the whole population, like every single person, has a say to get the elected officials, has a say in who are the elected officials. And I mean, like, I feel like everyone who has common sense can agree to be like, that's not the case right now. Like, obviously, there's so much money in politics right now in the United States and just in the Western world in general. There's so much like corruption and, what's it called? Different interests at bay and like, at large, sorry. And like different corporations kind of like managing politicians and all this stuff. Like it's very, very dark. It's very, very twisted. And, the more that you dig, the more that you'll find out. And so we don't need to go there. But back to the free speech thing. I think that there's this idea, and this is, a nice starting off point. I think that there's an idea that free speech encourages or ensures democracy. I think that that's what it is, that free speech ensures democracy. That if everyone can have a supposed voice, then that means that democracy can exist. And the moment that you start, clipping people's wings and shutting down people's voices, then democracy can exist, because, you have basically dictatorships coming up. And I think it's such a fine line to tread across, because it's like, I'll give you an example.
Yes.
In the United States or in any Western European country, for the most part, you can say stuff about the president. Like you can go on national television and like make a joke, and like that's totally normal. And I was having such a moment here in Brazil, because I'm here in Brazil, and my boyfriend's Brazilian, and we were watching another time to expose myself. I'm sorry, but when you're sick and you're just in bed all day, sometimes you've got to watch some shows, okay? And
you're forgiven.
Thank you. We were watching Saturday Night Live, which is, I actually don't like Saturday Night Live. It got, whatever. But we were watching it because RuPaul was hosting it, and RuPaul, whatever. I'm sorry. And so he was like, let's watch this. And then a lot of it, so much of Saturday Night Live, which is, for those of you that don't know Saturday Night Live, it's a sketch comedy show. It's like a comedy show in the United States, in New York. And so much of it was about like politics and making fun of Trump and making fun of the president and all this stuff. And he was looking at me in like disbelief. He was like, this is like, you can do this in the United States? And I was like, yeah, this is totally normal. Like, what are you talking about? And he's just like, this could never happen in Brazil. Like never. No one could ever go on national TV and just like make light of the president or like make direct jokes about that. And I was just like, oh yeah, that's actually the case for like most of South America. And like, if you think about it, like most of the world actually, like if you think about like Africa, South America, most of Asia, like you can't really go on national television and just be like, F, whatever, president, like I'm going to make fun of you, do whatever you want.
The next day it's like, and he committed suicide.
And he disappeared without a trace. Which, I mean, is kind of, you know, it's like, yeah, like I said, it's very scary, actually. It's very scary to think about these kinds of things, because I'll give one more example, and then I'll let you, because I've been going on for a while. Like, I think the fear that people have of like dictatorship or communism or fascism or not free speech is that when you look at, like, you know, communist China, and I'm not talking about like current China, I'm talking about communist China. There was this whole thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tiananmen Square and like the massacre at Tiananmen Square. But basically, there was this like massacre at the main square in Beijing, which is the capital, and it was students protesting against the government, and they just came in with military, you know, tanks and just killed them all.
Wow.
And the scariest part about that was that the government effectively erased that from history. And my experience living in China was that when you speak to people, like, it's something that you literally cannot speak about. The majority of, you know, a lot, I don't know if it's the majority, but a lot of like Chinese young people who like were born basically after that, because this happened in the early 90s, Tiananmen Square, I believe. They don't even know that that happened. Like, it's not in the history books. It's not in the internet, because the internet in China and other countries as well is totally, like, you know, censored. So they can't go online and search, did this happen in China? I remember I used to teach English in different cities in China. And I remember, like, at one point, like, the students wanted to talk to me about this. And I was just like, I don't know.
I'm not trying to banish.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not trying to banish. I was like, I was told when I got hired for this job that this is a list of things that I cannot speak about. But these were like Chinese students that had more money and that had access to, like, whatever, you know, dark web or whatever. They had access to like different types of internet, not the dark web, but like, you know, different types of internet. And they were like, no, we want to know. Like, we want to know what actually happened. So I think the fear is like, that power over history, that power over, like, well, you know, we can just literally erase something from happening. And I think that what's happened here with Donald Trump is such an interesting example, because literally he is, you know, the social media conglomerates and the monopolies, like, they're trying to basically erase him in a certain sense from the internet.
It's interesting. Hearing you speak, I'm reminded of 1984, and I get why people call it Orwellian. Because in 1984, one of the ministries is the Ministry of Truth, which is concerned with proliferating lies and changing histories. And that is the main purpose of that institution, the Ministry of Truth. So when just hearing how you've described it and this from this angle of vision, I get why people apply the Orwellian word to the situation, or why there's like a suspicion around it. If you're censoring this, are you prepared to, like, wipe this out of history or wipe certain voices out of history? So that's kind of one side, and I get the Orwellian use. But on the other side, as I've been hearing about it, in my quote research, and I always going to put research in quotation marks because, you know, that just meant I went to Google, maybe saw a couple of Wikipedias, and that was my research. But on the other side is the concern that, you know, like, this whole hate speech thing has come up in a modern political conversation. And you can't just allow certain hateful vibrations to just be freely distributed into the psyches of the masses of people, especially with things like digital media where you can easily mobilize people. Then this should not be allowed. But the problem is, who decides what constitutes hate speech? And I think for people who would be objecting to this sort of rubric of hate speech and then things being censored because it's hate speech, that becomes like the real concern. Like, what constitutes actual hate speech that deserves to be censored? Like, even if you look at the tweet of Donald Trump, I'm not going to the inauguration. There's nothing patently hateful about it. Okay, it's a little spiteful. It's definitely got some of that in there, but there's nothing patently hateful about it. And yet because I think as a narrative goes, yeah, it has to be taken in the context of the whole situation, and therefore it's kind of an excitement to violence. So then who gets to make the decision about what counts as hate speech or not. Like I think oftentimes, like even when you look at certain old school religious literatures, there's a lot of things in there that would definitely come up as hate speech. So then if that becomes the case, then can these be censored? Will it be right for them to be censored? So do people have a right to feel concerned about this? Like what's your, I think obviously the answer is yes in my vision, but you have this other angle which I'm not familiar with, and that's why I'm kind of putting it as a question to you. Like is it not a good or prudent concern to see this happening? To be concerned about this happening and wanting to like protest against it or fight against it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some of the research that I also that I also did about this topic, you suggested I watch some videos about this because I was totally like not aware of it. I mean, yeah, I was sick and I'm in Brazil, folks. So
I'm enjoying life. Got it.
But I think it was in the Russell Brand video that I was watching, and he brought up this philosopher who's I think current, maybe, I'm not sure actually. I don't want to. He might not be current actually. His name is Karl Popper, and he brought up this idea of the paradox of tolerance. And I'll skip the whole beginning part.
Right.
It says, as paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires to not tolerate. Sorry, I'll read that again. As paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires to not tolerate the intolerant.
So right. That makes sense to me, by the way. Just as a standalone statement, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then who gets to decide what is considered intolerant?
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me too. And I agree with that. You know, I agree, like the cartoon that I was reading this from, like is kind of showing like Nazis and Hitler as an example. And it's like we have to not tolerate those that are intolerant. And I think that that's the like really big problem here. It's like when you really dig a little bit deeper into this issue, of course it's about censorship, and of course it's about, you know, freedom of speech. And I think that, you know, freedom of speech is important. I think that censorship to a certain extent is important too, in a sense. It's like parent controls. Like I don't want my children watching like crazy death pornography on, you know, like that's insane.
Right.
And so like I think that but the problem becomes, it's like, well, who is determining what our cultural values are as a society? Like that's really the issue. And it's like, okay, and especially in a country like the United States, where it's like you have such a hodgepodge of like cultures and religions and all of this stuff. I think the problem with like what's this word with I think the problem with like liberals essentially is that there seems to be this, again, I'm going to use this word, utopian idea that like every single person who's different can get to the same understanding of what values are and like what that means. And I don't think that that's necessarily like wrong. I think that there probably is a way for people to get to like a universal value system, and like I do kind of think that, but I think that like they've probably been going about it the very wrong way, you know, just like thinking it's going to happen. I personally don't trust myself as like a human being to just think like, I'm just going to reach great values on my own as a person. Like, no, I don't trust myself that far. And I also don't think like, let's just put a bunch of people in the same city and like whatever, and just like see how the social experiment goes, and they'll just arrive to the same social values as you know, like this. And I think what it really comes down to is like this argument is like, you know, because some people say, well, innately humans are like base and animalistic, and if you leave them, you know, together, they're just going to kill each other and whatever. And then you have another group of people that are saying, no, deep down inside, we're good. We're children of God, and the good will prevail in any situation. And I think that that's like a very fine line, because then when it comes to like, well, who is determining our value? Like we already know who's determining our values as a society. It's the people who have money, you know, it's like these crazy rich corporations, conglomerates, monopolies, Facebook and etc. and, you know, Amazon and all of this stuff. Like they are literally determining what we value in the society.
Yeah, I feel like that's where the frightening part comes up. For me, there is, I imagine the Vedic culture that we hear about in sacred texts, for example, there was censorship. There was like obviously like a sort of a cultural censorship of such. You know, like there's certain things that you just didn't do in that particular culture. So maybe there wasn't like a specific law that says you can't do this in all cases. Of course, the law books in Vedic culture are heavy. The Vedas, they're quite comprehensive. But there's also
Mm.
sort of this cultural, what we would call as a social stigma. There's just certain things that you just didn't do. Like I remember growing up, for example, you didn't curse in front of your mother. That was just like something that you didn't do. And a lot of us had to
However,
learn that the hard way. I had to learn the hard way. Some people had to learn it the hard way, but it's just something that you didn't do and that you didn't tolerate if others did it in the culture. You know, like
yes,
even if I saw my friend like cursing in front of his mother growing up, like I lost respect for them. I would just like not talk to them. So
yeah,
there's sort of this social stigma that kind of works as a sort of natural censorship, not one that's kind of imposed by powers that you don't know. And that makes sense to me. And I was also
mm.
reminded of like the Gita, for example, just because we're talking about free speech specifically, the Gita speaks about the austerity of speech, you know, and it mentions 5 aspects for austerity of speech. Anuvega Karam means it's not annoying to others. Which is something that you get like hella social credit for today. If you're annoying for others, you know, you call yourself a troll, and that's considered a very valid form of communication, not well, communication of expression of freedom of speech. Another one is that it's truthful.
Mm.
Priya means it is pleasing. It's a
Mm.
pleasing vibration. Hitam means it is beneficial.
Mm.
And I forget the last one is it's based on the Vedas. That's the last one. So these are the
Mm.
5 aspects of austerity of speech. Now, from the cultural perspective of the Vedas, human life is meant for austerity. Tapo divyam putra kanyena sattvam. You know, yas shudyet yasma brahma sokyam tanantam. Human life is meant for austerity, for purifying the antakarna. And the antakarna literally means the inner instrument. Your mind, your intellect, your sense of self, ego. All of these things are contaminated or delimited in so many ways. And so to purify the antakarna, the prescription of austerity is given. And then austerity includes austerity of speech, and it has these 5 elements. So if one has to apply these 5 elements in speaking, especially if you grew up in a culture where it was considered incumbent upon you as a outstanding participant in the culture to practice this in order to participate, then there's a sort of natural censorship that comes up in that. And of
Mm.
course, there are sort of like cultural reminders to make sure that you follow that. Like even when I was growing up, you may remember this too, like we couldn't buy certain CDs unless you were a certain age
Mhm.
because they had like literally if it had like one curse word in it, then you couldn't buy that CD unless you were a certain age. I remember movies being like rated R if it showed like a little skin, rated R. Like you weren't allowed to see it unless you were
Mhm.
accompanied by a parent and so on. But now all of these sort of social stigmas and this sort of natural censorship have been removed, and so it gives this sense that you have complete freedom to do anything, to say anything, no matter how degrading. And then
Mhm.
suddenly we're being told in a very arbitrary sort of way that you don't have the right to do that, which would make sense to me, except that there is no cultural standard for which you can understand for yourself what is and what is not allowed. So
Mm.
suddenly someone's just coming down on you hard saying this is not allowed, and therefore we're going to censor you. And it's like, well, where is that coming from? This thing's really arbitrary. And so that becomes a scary part. Who is the person making the standards for these things? And why
Mm.
aren't we being provided like a clear template? Obviously we have the answer. The world's run by demons and all that, but I'm just saying in terms of thinking about it in a little bit more philosophical way, when arbitrarily some person's empowered to say, well, you can't say this thing, and what it gives the sense, and coming back to this word Orwellian, it gives a very Orwellian sense, because
Mm.
someone who may be speaking out against such a culture is now can be saying that this isn't the truth, this is a lie, whatever it is, and then you're just censored.
Mm,
And there's no criteria for why you were censored. You were exciting violence. I literally just said I didn't agree with that. Well, it's violence in our view because of the
mm,
context.
mm,
And so this becomes like a very dangerous thing.
mm, 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 mm. Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with you, and I think that it becomes very difficult to I feel like we come to this conclusion every single chit chat we have. It's like becomes very difficult to believe in anything in the material world because it's just like you don't really know who's calling the shots, you know? Like maybe you know that it's a conglomerate or etc. But who is that conglomerate? We kind of spoke about this last time where it's just like, who are these people, you know? What happened to personalism? And what happened to like knowing the person behind the desk or knowing the person who is like making the order? And so it becomes very difficult to like really even care. I remember in our, you know, I feel like it's very easy to just be like, whatever, it's all going to, you know, it's all going to shit anyway, so whatever. And
Right.
I usually tend more towards that. I'm just like, whatever, like everything's controlled by, you know, evil conglomerates and like this and etc. But at a certain point, one does have to stop and be like, wait a minute, you know, like is this actually like okay? Is any of this okay? And I think especially as people who are trying to practice spirituality and trying to be devotees, it's like it's a very fine line between like, oh, these artifices are used in service of my, you know, of my service. They're used in service of Krishna consciousness and etc., which is like all very good because that's usually the argument, right? Well, I'm using Facebook, I'm using WhatsApp, I'm using all of these things without, you know, without censorship in a sense, to what's it called, sorry, with censorship. Like it's okay that I'm being censored, it's okay that they updated all of their policies, WhatsApp updated their policy. We covered this last week, right, where they're like
Right.
they're literally looking through my cameras, they're literally like mining all my information, they're literally spying on me, right? But it's okay because I'm using it in Krishna service. And it's like, okay, yes, like I agree with that a lot. But also it's like, where is the line where we say, you know, no, this is not useful anymore because it kind of seems to be an affront, and a very like intense exploitation of like my humanity, you know? And it's like, oof, you know, I personally haven't gotten to that. I haven't gotten that angry yet about all of this stuff because I'm, you know, in Brazil enjoying life. I feel like if I was in the United States, I'd have like a much different approach on these kinds of things, and I'd be like, this and this and this. However, what was I going to say? I do think it's very interesting that you brought up. Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. I do think it's, you know, you brought up the Gita and kind of the different austerities of speech and how Vedic society was very much about like austerity and like having a life of austerity. And I think we spoke about this last time about like how essentially like this value of austerity has been so lost. And and not only has the value of austerity been lost, but just like the value of like truth has definitely been lost. The value of austerity has been lost. And the value of like, what am I trying to say? Hmm, like truth and faith and belief, you know? Because I feel like with the entire liberal standpoint of just like anything can mean anything and everything means everything and we're all, you know,
That seems
together.
to be more like a postmodern era philosophical disposition.
Yes, yes, it very much is, where it's like everything can mean anything and anything can mean everything. And it becomes very difficult actually to have that kind of point of view, you know, because I think like a very simple understanding of that is like the argument against like impersonal Vedanta and personal Vedanta, where it's like, I was just reading this in a purport somewhere that it's like actually form, you know, form of the deity, form of the Godhead, form of Krishna, that is actually like making us have a deeper relationship with him, you know. We're able to appreciate that form and have a deep connection with that form and have a deep personal connection with that form. So form very much is important in a sense. So form, category, name, label, you know, these kinds of things. And then what we're seeing right now is the opposite of that. It's like no labels, no names, no sexes, no this, all religions, you know, neo spirituality, all religions, all spiritualities, they're all the same thing, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to pick your brain about this because I was in I was in a training recently, and there was a student who was asking
Uh-oh.
about, and
Don't
there
put me
was
with anybody. I'm not trying
no,
to
no,
be.
no, 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 no. There was a student who was asking kind of like the age-old question about like Hare Krishnas and devotional life and this kind of thing of like you know them getting the feeling from some people that like everything is one and like it's all love, it's all bhakti, like this kind of thing, like we're all just like everything is good. And then having a different experience in devotee life where it's just like it's only Krishna and it's only like this and it's only like that and it's only like this. And this person was having like a very conflictive like experience because she was like, well, I experienced these people telling me that like all of God's names are beautiful and we can chant whatever we want and all religions mean all religions are the same and this and this. And then she was like, and I had another experience in the same, you know, Krishna consciousness that was like, no, it's only Krishna, it's only this. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, I remember this was in my mind. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because I definitely have like my answer to this, and I definitely have like what I think about this, and less what I think and more what I've been taught, like what I've been taught about this.
Mm.
But I think that this is where it gets kind of like, do you see what I'm saying? Like it's kind of the same thing in a sense. It's like this postmodern liberal society of just like it's all the same and we can all have the same values and we can all exist as the same and no labels and no etc and no whatever, which is like this kind of utopian weird fantasy
Yeah.
life that they're painting for us. Lo and behold, it's an Orwellian dystopian, reality that like more and more people are realizing that like we're inching our way towards this Orwellian dystopian reality. However, this kind of artifice of like it's all one love is kind of being utilized to get people into that space. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, I think I got what you're saying. And
Yeah, sorry, it was very all over the place.
the first thing that comes to mind, the first thing that came to mind was literally this verse that is one of the seminal verses for the Bhagavatam, the main verse actually for Gaudiya Vaishnava theology. There's our theology basically based on two verses only. And that entire 18,000 verse book, only two verses is our theology based on, 1 to 11 and 1 through 28. And then 1 to 11, reality is described as non-dual consciousness. And that non-dual consciousness, so it's not two. It looks two, but it's actually not two because the foundation is one, and it's the support for everything. An infinite reality, that's the support of everything. So when you're speaking about an infinite reality that's the support of everything, that means necessarily opposites exist inside that infinite reality harmoniously. Harmoniously means that there's no disturbance to that ground of reality just because it's an opposite. So that I think, so what happens to finite entities, because we're finite, the nature of our finitude is to experience something as right and the opposition as not right. That's just because to be finite means that you are what you are because you're not the other. That's what it means to be finite. And we don't have an experience of what it means to be infinite. So, and if you're infinite, that literally means there's nothing outside of you. That means everything must be existing inside of you. And there's all these opposites that we experience. And so those opposites also exist inside the infinite reality. So what ends up happening is that, so anyway, reality is this infinite non-dual awareness or consciousness, Advaya Gyan. And it's sometimes referred to as Brahman, it's sometimes referred to as Paramatma, and it's sometimes referred to as Bhagavan. So according to this verse from the Bhagavatam, it's not the reality that changes, but the degree of perception of that reality. You could say the degree of completion in the perception of that one reality. So what happens is one is having a certain perception of that one reality. They call it Brahman. And someone has another perception of that same reality through a different method, and they call that reality Bhagavan. And then they begin fighting with each other, thinking that only their particular perception is right. Now, there is a degree of completion there. And I do get a sense that the more complete your the more complete your perception of reality, the more accommodating you can be of the variegatedness that comes up within that infinite reality. Or say it the opposite way, the less complete our perception, the less accommodating we are for things that appear to be outside of that reality for us. So that doesn't exist inside our reality, so therefore it's wrong. So it's a question of the development of consciousness where we're able to have that vision, that sort of spacious, all accommodating vision. Until then, so that's kind of like the caveat. Until it's a question of the development of consciousness. And like in our little tagline for Chit Chat, we say that CHIT means enlightened awareness. And then we say that there's delimiters on our awareness at the present moment. Until those delimiters are removed so that our consciousness can kind of stretch out and become truly spacious. Until then, you kind of have to recognize what those delimiters are and figure out how to cross beyond them. But you have to also learn how to work with them while you're in, you could say, captured, so to speak, by those delimiters. You have to work within that framework and then figure out how you're going to go beyond those delimitations so that you can be more accommodating in your consciousness. So I think what happens, I've actually experienced this a lot, and I have a really good quote for this also from Prabhupada. Let me see if I can pull it up. But what happens with postmodern people today, especially those who get into like the spirituality, we tend to overestimate the spaciousness of our awareness without actually having done the work to break the delimiters on it. Like we speak, all spiritual traditions will speak about like ego death or going beyond ego. And it sounds nice when you hear it, but experience-wise, subjectively, it's terrible. And I want to put a quote on my Instagram, urban sage quote. But I want to put a quote on my, the quote goes something like this, that the regenerative process is usually resisted because it means crossing the threshold of destruction. So, you know, we want to be regenerated, right? So we're not enlightened. We want to enter into that enlightened sphere, that space that is complete freedom and completely spacious and all accommodating and all loving. We all ideally want to move into that sphere, you know, spiritual, if you're after some high level spirituality. But you have to be regenerated to enter into that sphere. And so the path towards that regeneration is literally a destruction of the quote old self, or the removal of these delimiters, the ego. And so my quote, it's not my idea, obviously, but I thought I found good language for it, that the regenerative process is usually resisted because it requires going through the threshold of destruction. And so I feel like what happens with postmodern spirituality, is especially as it becomes industrialized and marketable, is that people like the high ideal part, but the part of destruction and ego death and all that part is not as appealing. And so we kind of imagine ourselves to be in a space, to be in a conscious space that we're not yet in. And then it ends up being a contradiction to our actual reality. I also sometimes refer to this as a moral tension, like a moral tension between the ideal and our actual reality. So we don't always work within the actual limitations of our reality and move progressively towards the ideal. We just imagine ourselves in the ideal position, and it contradicts in some ways our reality. And somehow we try to force that ideal into our reality instead of us breaking out of that limited reality and entering into the ideal. And the result is another sort of violence that ends up happening to ourselves and to others. So when it comes to, like, just to your example, when people talk about equality is that's a very metaphysical thing. Like the way that we think about it is very metaphysical because it's patently not physical. We're like obviously not equal on the physical platform in so many ways. We look different, we have different intelligence, different abilities, so we're obviously not equal. So the insight that all men are created equal is literally a metaphysical insight. It's not a physical fact. But we try to like force that metaphysical insight into the actual playing field without giving enough consideration that actually you have to actually grow into that consciousness within the space that you're in. Now you can't force it onto the reality. And so when you try to force it onto the reality without actually growing your consciousness, it just ends up becoming another form of violence. And I guess coming back to the free speech thing and all that, it kind of appears that this is what goes on. instead of just like actually growing into an all-loving sort of consciousness. You just say you have to be in this consciousness, or else, you know, you're censored or you're blocked. Instead of giving people the methods by which they can grow. And this is why I think I have a more conspiratorial angle, because you're also obliged to like follow some arbitrary whatever, but you're not given the knowledge or the methods by which you can actually grow into that psyche. Rather, the things that they give us, like if you look at the music industry and a lot of the so-called content creation of different creators out there and so on, even the academy for that matter, it's not like you're getting methods for how you can grow into like deeper levels of consciousness and enter into this more ideal kind of abstract space within. And so when you're told you're supposed to do that without the methods by which you can actually come into that realization, then it ends up being another form of violence that takes place in the name of brotherhood and universal brotherhood and all love. And
Oh my God. Everything you just said was like, I was just like, yes, 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 yes. Because it's like, and I feel like we've mentioned this in Chit Chat before. I feel like we've gotten to this point before. It's like, if you, that internal work, you know, like that internal work, spiritual work that needs to happen for us to get to the spiritual ideal is like what is necessary. And in many ways we've kind of like put the horse before the cart. Is that how that goes? I think, right?
I
It's
think
like
the horse is supposed to go before the cart. Hello.
So is it
the cart before the horse? Come on, duh. Just put the picture in your head.
I'm really, really bad at sayings. So the cart before the horse, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You're just putting the picture in your head. Okay.
So because it's like, yeah, it's like this very beautiful metaphysical idea is like not essentially like, you know, able for us to grasp it if we're not doing that internal work and internal growth. And what I was saying at the beginning, it's like, and in a sense, it's like, okay, we have a country or, you know, a community, like whatever you want to use, you know, whatever example we want to use, that's based on these very lofty metaphysical ideals. And then the proper care isn't being put in place to the individual person or the township or like the whatever, for them to actually begin to do that internal work to get to that ideal, you know, because I think having ideals is obviously very important, and having vision and having goals and having, you know, all this, like that stuff is very important and it should be there in a sense. But then the care that is involved in basically facilitating for a person or for society to get there is like a lot. It's a lot of care. It's a lot of, you know, attention. And what I was saying at the beginning, it's like if we're left to our own devices of just like do whatever you want, say whatever you want. The only thing you can't say is going against these lofty ideals. But anything else, everything else you can say. You know, do whatever you want, say whatever you want, and you know, to each his own. It's very. I feel like it's a very dangerous thing to do and a very dangerous place to be. And therefore, what ends up happening is that you expect, you know, I think that people have these like high expectations of like people having certain values or people this or people agreeing on things. I remember when we were talking about this yesterday about the Capitol, that so many people were kind of like, they were just in disbelief that this could happen in the United States and like, woe is me and like all of this stuff. And it's like, you know, my reaction and a lot of people that I know's reaction was just like, really, you're in disbelief? Because this seems like right on point. This seems like what
right on time also.
Right on time. Like, and I think it's interesting. Yesterday I was like bored yesterday in bed sick, and I was talking, you know, with my boyfriend, and we were just like, who, like, what, like we were having this moment where it's like, who controls the internet, and like who are these people, and like what society do we even live in? Like we were having this moment, and it was like, well, who's the most followed person on Instagram? And I was like, I don't know, I have no idea. So we looked it up. We're like, who are the most followed people on Instagram? And it's ridiculous, folks. Like it's not even, it's sad. It's just sad that like this is who we idolize as a society. It's this football player named Cristiano Ronaldo,
Oh yeah,
Then
yeah.
it's him. Then it's like Kylie Jenner and Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez and like I can't remember the fifth one or something like that. But literally, like these are the people who have like the highest followings in like all of whatever. And it's just like it's just goes to show you that it's like if we're left to our own devices, this is what we're gonna do. If we're left to our own devices, we're simply going to
Well,
fall. Yeah, go for it.
yeah, I was going to say, left to our own devices, we, as conditioned souls, we choose
Yes.
pleasure over inherent value. Like
Yes.
something is only valuable in terms of how it gives pleasure,
Yes.
usually the central or mental satisfaction. But we
Yes.
don't choose something that is inherently valuable, even if it's like austere in the beginning when, applying it or associating with it. It's austere, but it actually is inherently valuable. And so, yeah, I guess maybe in sort of conclusion, I say like concluding words, but I'm reminded of this analogy. It comes in the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but this is the basic image of the honeycomb.
Mm.
And apparently, the bees, they go inside the honeycomb and they're trying to enjoy the honey inside the honeycomb. But in the process of enjoying the honey, apparently, the bees also sting each other because they're in very close proximity and they're like kind of stinging each other whilst also trying to enjoy the honey. So I feel like in the world situation where leaderships are necessarily capricious in their imposition of rules because they're only doing it for pleasure. And if something is against their pleasure or what they see will bring the greatest amount of pleasure, there's an imposition that's put on. It's not like there's a field created by inherent value. Like this is
Mm.
inherently value, but and all the rules that we come up with have to be based on what helps to bring us towards inherent value. That's not the playing field. The playing field is sense gratification. And if I'm in the position of power, I'm going to exploit those with less power. That's just the way that cookie crumbles. Jivo jivasa jivanam. One living entity is food for another. You can't even get out of that. It's just the law of nature. So what ends up happening is that we're all trying to enjoy our honeycombs. This is the analogy that I remember this analogy. I have to find the exact purport. But we all enter into this honeycomb of sense gratification. All of us trying to enjoy our individual pleasures. But while doing so, we have to also get stung by the other bees who are also trying to enjoy that same honey. So I'm getting the sense when it comes to like social media, like I'm just on the verge of hitting that button. You know that meme where the guy has to choose one button or the other, and he's like sweating. So I'm basically right there now with my whole Facebook, WhatsApp, and even my Instagram. Um, I'm trying to do positive stuff with it. I think I do positive things largely with it. I mean, I waste my time sometimes also, but I do a lot of positive stuff with that. But the positive things that I'm doing, I'm not able to see if it outweighs the negative impact these platforms are having.
Mm.
And what's coming up for me in my own just inner contemplation about it is that is this just a honeycomb? Whilst I'm trying to enjoy, I'm going to get stung by the other bees in there who are bigger, who are more powerful, and who are, literally trying to devour me, maybe in economic ways or other ways they're trying to devour. And so if I'm attached to the little bit of honey that I get from these platforms, then that comes along with this being consumed by more powerful entities. And
Mm.
so I guess what comes up to me looking at it on a more social level is that everyone has become addicted to their honeycombs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's Facebook, Instagram, this or that, we're all addicted to the honeycomb. And now the situation has come up where it becomes apparent that we're being devoured or accosted at the very least by other more powerful bees in that honeycomb. And so we have, at some point, it seems to me that we're going to have to make a decision.
Mm.
And if we choose in favor of the pleasure principle, like the honey, instead of choosing in favor of inherent value, and not that necessarily that looks like renouncing something, but I do think it looks like that. Then if you choose in favor of pleasure, then you have to also, along with that, take the transgression of your privacy and all these sorts of things that this comes along with that territory. or you choose to let go of that honeycomb and that honey and fly like a free bee to to the lotus flower of Krishna's lotus feet. Oh, look at me, I'm getting a little poetic there. So like, I know we've talked about this over the summer about spirituality sometimes bringing up periods where a radical sort of decision has to be made, and I do get a sense that we're moving, if it's not really already upon us, we're definitely moving in such a direction that a radical decision, or not, and you can just be devoured. You can stay in the honeycomb, eat your little honey, but be devoured. Maybe that's not an inspirational message, but that is my own contemplation about the situation.
No, that's it. I mean, thank you. And just to amplify and kind of give my last 2 cents here before we sign off, it's like, I also kind of feel that way. It's just like, I feel like it's a very personal decision, but I feel like that personal decision needs to be, it needs to be very informed. It's like, if I am participating in this sham of the material world, then let me know what is the material world, and like, what does it constitute, and like what's my part to play in it, and what's karma, and what does my soul have to do with all, let me read the Bhagavad Gita. Oh, okay, I have some answers, and just like that, if I'm going to participate in the sham that is social media, then let me do some research that's a little bit more than just like research. Like, let me do some actual research in regards to, like, okay, like, how much of my information are they taking, and how much am I invested in this or not invested in this, or like, what's going on, and then take the decision to either make that radical change and say I'm moving off of this, or take that decision to say no, I'm going to stay on it, and I'm going to try to work within the system and like try to change things that way, or etc. But I feel like in general there's such a not necessarily lack of information, because I think that it's there if you look for it. I just think that it's very easy to go along with the status quo with things, and that status quo, unfortunately, is constantly changing. It's constantly shifting. It's like, one moment it's this, and one moment it's that, and one moment we are for this person, and one moment we're not for this person. And I think it's unfortunate, because when we pay attention so much to the material world and its offerings, it's very easy to get caught up in that sway of like, I like it, I don't like it, gone, off with his head, no, protect, oh this, oh that, whatever. And it's like, that's fine and everything. Like, if that's what we want to be in, if that's what you want to be in, then like, know what you're getting yourself into. I think that that's kind of my message. I mean, for me on a personal note, I will say that I feel like it is that sense of, or that feeling that like, I need to make some sort of radical shift, and I feel it coming. But I also don't want to be disingenuous about things, like, I don't want to be like, I'm doing this because this is what I think I should do, and this is like the highest ideal, and this is what people are expecting me to do, so this is what I'm going to do. It's like, no, that doesn't have lasting power. It doesn't have like a lasting force behind it. And personally, I feel like I need to get there genuinely. Like, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. I've had enough, and I need to like dedicate more of my time to my spiritual life. Delete. I'm not that advanced yet, so I haven't gotten there. However, I'm
and the mind's like, get your butt out of here, dude. You ain't going nowhere.
The funniest thing too is like, I think about, because it's like, yeah, I'm trying to do good things on there, and like I'm using it for good, but also I'm spending a lot of time just being like, looking at funny memes and like this kind of stuff. I've mentioned this before in Chit Chat, but I think that the biggest shade anyone can throw you is when your phone at the end of the week tells you how much you've been using your phone, and it's like, every week it's just going up and up and up, and like, I see it happening, and I'm just like, I've been 6 hours a day, something like that, like whatever it is. I feel like it's like we each have our individual breaking point, and I think that like, we have to be aware of that and honor that. It's like, okay, this is enough, this is enough, and it doesn't mean like gone forever, because I think something we didn't even get into today is that there are like internet services out there, like Signal as a what's it called, as an alternative to WhatsApp, or like, oh god, what was it called, the one that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Parler. Apparently they got together to shut down Parler,
Right.
which Parler was apparently this like uh, free speech kind of place. Apparently, though, sorry to get into this, but just to like make this last point. Apparently, though, kind of like the argument against Parler, was it was this dark place where everyone could just say whatever they wanted, and like
But has anyone looked at Twitter in the last week? I mean,
exactly,
it's like,
exactly. And it's just like, again, I just wanted to bring that last point up because again, it's like if we're left to our own devices, you know, where it's like the pleasure principle is high, and I'm just like in the material world enjoying. If I'm left to those devices, then it doesn't matter what platform. It doesn't matter if I'm on Twitter. It doesn't matter if I'm on Parler. It doesn't matter if I'm on Signal. It doesn't matter if I'm on WhatsApp. I'm still going to be sending and receiving degrading stuff on my phone and participating in that sham. So, you know, once again, going back to kind of our tagline, it's about, you know, getting our shit together, getting our internal consciousness kind of together before I even start to participate or be a part of this, you know, external world. Yes.
much more can be said, but we'll pause for now.
Yes, much more can definitely be said. Thank you so much, Jaya. It was fun as always, and thank you so much for listening, everyone. Kristen and Maharani Vrindadevi and Matea and all those that are there listening. Thank you so much. And we'll be here next week on Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
All right.
Haribol. Thank you, Jaya.
Sure.